Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and we're doing one of these again! The numbers have gone down. What happened to this generation? You used to care about professional quality insight about the format given from someone who has no idea what the format is or what's good in it. But if this last weekend has shown us anything, that designation, idiot who has no idea what's good, can extend to pretty much everyone who plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Because I think not only myself, but a significant amount of professional players and people who are paid to come up with understandings about the format got it entirely wrong. We were supposed to put Exodia in Tier 0. I'm making this after Indianapolis, so understand that my understanding is going to reflect what happened at Indianapolis, and I'm very open to being wrong as hell for Richmond. And I'll be at Richmond, so, you know, if I'm wrong, there are consequences. But first, this video is sponsored by HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal delivery service that takes the worst parts out of cooking, keeping it simple and enjoyable. If you're worried about your skills in the kitchen, never fear, as HelloFresh's recipes are made for any level of cooking skill. Their ingredients arrive at your doorstep, pre-portioned and ready to cook, along with pictured step-by-step recipe cards, so you can't mess up if you tried. And believe me, I tried. Fall is here, and if you're feeling the season, check out HelloFresh Market for some extra add-ons and enjoy the season's limited time fall flavors lineup. With desserts like the apple cider cake with caramel sauce and the mini pumpkin cheesecake, you'll be getting some of the best seasonal treats out there. And if you need something fast, HelloFresh has you covered. They've got quick and easy options, including their 15-minute meals. That's less time than it takes to get a delivery, and you get a home-cooked meal to boot. HelloFresh saves me a ton of time after I'm exhausted from stream, letting me spend my quality time relaxing instead of fretting over what I'm gonna eat. Use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use my code POGMBTOCT16 to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. Offer is for new subscriptions only and varies by plan across 9 boxes. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. All right, first and foremost, let's talk about Tier 1. One deck only, you know it's gotta be Rescue Ace. Okay, so I'm putting this in here because results-wise, this is what the data supports. Rescue Ace had an unbelievable weekend. The new Diabell Star cards rocketed it to the top of Tier 1, 12 copies in the top 32. And most of them converted to top 16 as well. Unbelievable representation rate, unbelievable turnover. However, I remain unconvinced about Rescue Ace. It is so frustrating to see a deck like this do so well, despite the fact that I think its matchup spread is not particularly good. When you look at the other top decks, things like Tierlist, Unchained, and Pearly, Rescue Ace has a really hard time against all those strategies. Unchained and Tierlist specifically, it feels like it has to win the die roll to even have a chance, and the way that Pearly is being built now, despite it historically being a really good matchup for Rescue Ace, I think is like a 90-10 in Pearly's favor. Pac was talking about how he thought it was impossible to drop a game to this strategy. The thing is, those are not the only decks being played. So if you can guarantee a more diverse format than that, Rescue Ace does wallop everything else on the tier list, with the exception of like Labyrinth, which isn't a real deck. So in a diverse format where you theoretically could be playing against anything, Rescue Ace is a great pick, with the understanding that if you play one of its bad matchups, which statistically you will, you are going to have to either win the die roll or sack out of your mind. But at Indianapolis, the format was diverse, and the end result was Rescue Ace dominance. As a result, it not only got a ton of slots in the top 32 and in the top 16, it closed out finals. So maybe I'm just a moron. Okay, let's go to, I named it actual Tier 1. I don't want to disrespect Rescue Ace. I am a Rescue Ace pilot, and I do like the strategy. But these are the decks that I would also consider when building for or going to a tournament, and unsurprisingly, the first one is going to be Pearly. I think Pearly's incredibly good this format. It has a lot of fantastic matchups. Very few decks can deal with just a big guy that has like 9 material and can spin 4 cards back. It is exceptionally consistent. It's very strong. It has slots for non-engine because it can always discard them to the quick plays if it has to. The problem with Pearly is that the hate against Pearly is so good that it feels like it wins the game on the spot. There's a million different pieces of non-engine that cook this deck to the moon. Pun intended. And you can't possibly play around them the same way you could in a deck that loses to Droll by playing like main deck crossout designator, because there's so many of them, they're so diverse, and they all beat the deck in different ways. Again, Pac was talking about this on Twitter, how he feels that people are just playing a whole bunch of defensive non-engine cards, which makes it really hard to build for a deck that loses to all of them. Next up, Unchained. Unchained had a really bad weekend. I think that has very little to do with the deck. I think the deck is still in a very good spot. I think that things like main deck Bestial are becoming more common, which is a little bit of a problem for this deck, but certainly not lights out. I think it's still incredibly powerful. I think at Indianapolis, it just wasn't popular, and it wasn't being piloted by the right pilots, if that makes sense. I've always kind of said this about Unchained. It's secretly two different decks. There's a version of the deck that's not very good, that's just YouTube combo-oriented, people playing off a spreadsheet. That deck is very beatable, but against players who understand how the Unchained pieces work with each other and how they can represent everything while playing around as much as possible, the deck feels unbeatable. Really seasoned Unchained pilots, I think, still have what it takes to get into top cut. The problem is a lot of those players audibled onto different decks for this event. Next up. Oh boy, this one's hard. So I really like Tierlist. I think it's a fantastic deck. I think it's a great choice for the current meta. The problem is that Tierlist occasionally just loses to itself. You know, there are games in which an opponent is on main deck Bestials and you lose 2 of your names out of the graveyard and there's just nothing you can do for the remainder of the game. But there are also games where your mills don't work out and you just lose. That sucks. That's awful. And as a result, it's kind of a hard sell to be like, a significant amount of the games are going to be out of your control. Sometimes you will gamba and you will lose. That said, it also has the most ability to play through almost anything I feel is anything on this list. It has the ability to put up some of the most impressive boards as anything on this list with the most diverse points of interaction. And I still do think that the deck has what it takes to be super competitive in a post-AGOV format. I'm not yet sold on the Horus cards, but they could be part of that list. They could not. I think as we coalesce around a more solved build, a lot of the problems people have with the deck will go away. It's a little loose at the moment, but I think the pieces are there. And finally in Tier 1, Mannadium. All right, this one, I never thought I was going to have to say this, but the new stuff released in AGOV really pushes what Mannadium is capable of. It now has the capacity to play through a lot, and I think a lot of professional players picking up this deck is less a reflection of people being like, I have to do good with Mannadium, and more making a calculation that this is a deck that has the capacity to go the distance. Obviously, you saw the top 4 this weekend. I think there was one in top 32 as well. Didn't Hani clear with it? There's a lot going on for this strategy. The downside is that it has a real problem with exactly Droll and Lockbird, and people are getting a little more comfortable playing that card, both in side decks and in main decks. But outside of that, it really does have the capacity to play through a lot, represent a lot in the same way that Unchained would, and I think that it is going to have to be something that you have a plan for moving forward. Next up, Tier 2. Only a couple decks in this one, and the first one's Flu. So I know I literally just said that people are being more comfortable playing Droll in their main deck, but I'm still advocating for this deck. I think it lines up really, really well against a bunch of the metagame. A significant amount of the points of interaction in Rescue Ace and in a bunch of the decks in Tier 1 do not matter at all to Fluandereeze. A significant amount of plays available to decks like Unchained and Mannadium can't help but put monsters in attack position, which is really good for cards like M-Pen. Against decks like Rescue Ace, the deck puts up significant back row, which is a real problem. And against a significant amount of the decks on this list, the Unexplored Winds does a ton of damage to their strategy. I think Fluandereeze is a really sick pick for this upcoming format, but I think it does have a real problem with a lot of the side deck options that people are bringing. For that reason, I don't feel comfortable putting it in Tier 1, but I think it is something you should expect to play, and it is something you should be practiced against, because it plays on an axis that is different enough. If you are unprepared, you will get absolutely schlonged by this one. Also, Winds is still legal. Shifter's still legal, you know? After that... Okay, I just believe too much. I don't know what to say. I just believe too much. I never believe that Dragon Link is out. The fact that a significant amount of the Tier 1 decks have really good targets for Bestials makes me think it's okay. The fact that that Resonator list that was functionally just Bestial Turbo cleared into Top Cut makes me think it's okay. It's gotta be around. I know that it had a rough weekend, but I think the deck is still strong, still has the capacity to play through almost everything, still has an incredibly favorable hand trap lineup against the meta. I just believe too much in my heart of hearts that this deck is still playable. Next up. Okay, we are just going to all pretend that this is Sprite, because Sprite's not on here. This list doesn't have Sprite. We're just going to pretend that Salamangreat of Fire is a Sprite card. Sprite is in a really weird position. They just got the greatest Link to in the history of time, SP Little Knight, which you would think would make the deck at least somewhat playable, and largely SP Little Knight has just been played in other better decks to bigger effect. But I don't think that Sprite is all the way out of the metagame entirely. I think that diverse formats really favor that deck. I think it has a wealth of options that almost no other strategy can boast. It has a really good way to interact with any specific interaction point, be it back row or like monster effects. It does have a little bit of a problem with Droll, but it's not so pronounced that I would feel comfortable being like, oh, don't bring it to a tournament because people are main decking Droll the same way I would for like Fluonderies. I think the strategy is fine. I think it will take some time to figure out what build of it is worth playing. All right, let's go to high potential. So here I want to actually focus on decks that I think have high potential instead of using it as a holding facility for bad strategies. So let's begin with Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a very strange deck. It's much better now than it was in the previous format in a vacuum. The new card is incredibly strong for the deck. It gives it a lot of turn 0 options, which is really impressive. I think that the strategy has a lot of teeth and, again, operates on an axis that a lot of decks aren't prepared to interact with. Specifically, if you look at Rescue Ace, I think its Labyrinth matchup is like 90-10. Labyrinth's got some bad matchups. I think it's really bad into Unchained, for instance. Not super strong into Monodium, because the deck can just put up a quadrillion negates before you can do anything. But if Rescue Ace has shown anything, it's that matchup spreads aren't super important in a format this diverse. And I think that Lab does have the potential to just walk all over a lot of rogue options. That said, good deck with bad matchups is a quality that Rescue Ace already has. And its bad matchups are less bad, and its good matchups are much better. Which means that you're competing for the same type of shooting under the gap as you are with Rescue Ace. The difference is Lab's got a much lower ceiling. It's a lot more telegraphed. It only really does the one thing. So that's why it's in high potential. Next up, Exo. I feel like I'm always saying this. Seems like a good metagame for Exo. Exo Sister is strong. Certainly Exo Sister is strong. I mean, you would be ridiculous to claim that it isn't. It just got top 32, right? People can't help but playing with their graveyards right now. All of the tier 1 decks do it, and as a result, they all trigger all of the Exo Sister effects. The Exo Sister point of interaction is robust enough that it really does hose pretty much everything. The problem is it's got a really low ceiling. It just doesn't accomplish as much as any of the other top decks. Relies a lot on non-engine, things like floodgates in the back row or going second tools. That maybe have coverage against some of the top decks, but not all of them. But a skilled pilot with a good read on the meta can still take this pretty far. All right, so instead of bad decks here at the bottom, I've put who knows, this format is all over the place, because I don't really feel comfortable calling any of these decks like bad, and I think they probably could all still win a YCS. I just feel like they're like poorly positioned right now. And let's begin with Fur Hire. So it's kind of weird putting Sprite in tier 2, but Sprite Fur Hire in this like bottom rung of the ladder. That's because it's got this weakness that Sprite doesn't, and that's that the Fur Hire build of Sprite does not have a lot of room for non-engine. I think that a lot of this format is going to be determined by the non-engine that you are playing, and the deck that has the fewest slots with which to play is in a uniquely bad position. All of the weaknesses of Sprite, but none of the ability to have the coverage that playing a diverse option or a diverse array of non-engine gets you, right? Its line is good, but so is Monodium's uninterrupted. Branded's weird. Saying Branded is good or bad is... It feels like it changes every day. I would say right now I wouldn't bring Branded to a tournament, but the people who play Branded will bring Branded to a tournament until they ban Branded Fusion, so who knows. Right now I think it's in a uniquely poor position because I think there are some hands with which are hurt by a lot of the cards that hurt the rest of tier 1. Droll, for instance, I think is okay against it, especially the builds that people are playing right now. The Bestials are, of course, incredibly strong against the strategy. And post-board, people are still on, like, Dimensional Barrier and all the cards that win you the game instantly. It's also in this weird position where a bunch of really cool stuff came out in AGOV and it can't actually play any of it. Like, I guess theoretically you can throw an SP Little Knight in there and, like, make it turn 3. But who are we kidding? Next up is Chimera. Chimera is so weird. It's so strange. This got new support in AGOV, and the new support is good. It's really strong. It enables not only a bunch of really cool plays in the deck, it enables a bunch of really cool plays to splash Chimera in other decks. Maybe someday we'll make an OMO about, like, here's all the cool decks that could theoretically play a small Chimera engine from this position on. But the deck still only does the one thing. It tries to get Baphomet on field, resolve it, and activate Chimera Fusion afterwards. And against a lot of decks, that is not nearly enough. You'll have, like, a negate conditional on your opponent not having a way to deal with Mirror Sword Knight. You'll have a 4-card hand, and your opponent maybe has access to Guardian Chimera or something. And that's like, that's a good setup, but it's not a great setup, which means you are, like many other decks, leaning on non-engine. But you're largely not leaning on the non-engine for going second, because a lot of these cards are really only good if you're able to resolve them uninterrupted. Baphomet into an established board that has negates, for instance, not very strong. So as a result, when I say non-engine, I mean like Ash Blossom here, right? I mean like a hand trap. I'm not talking about like Tactics Talents. This puts the deck in a really weird position, where it feels like it wants to play a ton of non-engine to supplement a very svelte main deck package, but all the best non-engine right now is for going second. So you're on like books and stuff to like maybe stop a Pearly opponent. It's weird. If the metagame condenses down to fewer decks, this deck will be good. But until then, I think they're just going to jam super polymerization and be like, I hope this works. God, I hope this works. All right, I think we can knock the rest of these out real quick. Dark World's in the same position as a number of decks on this list, which is if people start playing Droll and Lockbird, it literally cannot win. The difference is that Dark World also can occasionally just not win by its own merits. Sometimes your opponent draws no interaction and you still can't go off. Deck's not good, despite the fact that it's very frustrating. Ken and Gen are cool, but don't resolve any of this deck's fundamental problems. People are playing Bestial's main deck, which is really bad news for Mathmech, but the other piece of really bad news for Mathmech is that Mathmech is not very good. I keep saying Sword Soul's not strong right now, but someone could show up tomorrow to a YCS and win with Sword Soul. Sometimes they just want it more. Like Chimera, Marincess feels like it has to play a lot of non-engine that isn't necessarily good going second, like they're really hedging on cards like Droll and Lockbird to make up the difference in a lot of matchups. Additionally, it tends to get cross-hate with Pearly. Like if people are playing Kaijus to wax a Noir, they also just destroy your entire game plan. Just feels like a less competent Pearly deck. Come on, man. I guess what I'd say about this one is like, anti-spell is being played. As always, Rika is not a competent deck. It's not realistic. It competes for the same metagame space as Monadium in that it's a balls-to-the-wall combo strategy that wins the game if it's uninterrupted, but Monadium can play through interruption to a degree. It can play second to a degree. The downside is that there is not a Monadium equivalent of Jess. Once Monadium finds its Jess, this will be undisputed. But for now, this deck is not good unless you are Jess. Come on, man. Haven't we suffered enough? Max Reynolds won an OTS championship, I think, 2 weeks ago with a cash tier list that he built in 10 minutes. That was very funny. That is going to be the last anything resembling a top I expect to see out of this deck. God, I wish this deck was playable. Sadly, it loses to absolutely everything, and now people are main decking Super Poly, so I guess it loses to even more. Versus Soul. Who's ready for Versus Soul? Versus Soul. I mean, it topped this last weekend. I don't know how it keeps happening. To me, the deck seems like Exo Sister, with like all the same problems as Exo Sister, but there's always like one random player at a YCS who just has the dream run and loses in top 32. The Mathmech of 2023? I guess. And finally, Infernoble. Still really puzzled by this. I think that Infernoble does have the chops. I think it does have the ability to kind of go the distance. I think it has lines that play through pretty much anything, but they are lower impact lines than the Monadium deck for sure. So I think there has to be a good reason to play this deck over Monadium, and presently, I don't think there is. I think there is a scenario where the metagame develops to such a point that Monadium is attracting almost all of the anti-combo hate, and Infernoble, which has a much more flexible and available combo, and a lot of a pronounced ability to play through the going second blowouts like Triple Tack, becomes like a powerful combo strategy. But, you know, I'll believe it when I see it, I guess. So that's where we are. Again, I want to stress that I feel that the difference between the good decks in this format and the bad decks in this format is so much less pronounced than it usually is, and a significant amount of these decks, including the ones in this bottom rung, I think could make really deep runs at a YCS, if not win it entirely. I mean, that doesn't go for MathMech. Sorry, boys. All right, now rattle off your pet decks, and I'll tell you why they're not on here. Oh, real quick, the person who's saying Salamangreat, where would you actually put Salamangreat? Here. In fact, here. Get off the list. Plunder Patrol. Do not think Plunder Patrol is very good. A lot of the reason to play Plunder Patrol was it had a really good Kashtira matchup, and that deck is gone. Tistina. Traptrix. There's always some Traptrix defender who comes into these. Has Traptrix done anything, like in the past 4 months, that warrants it being on this list? Exodia, in the hands of one man specifically. Tri-Brigade. Tri-Brigade topped. What the hell was up with that? It wasn't like it was like Sprite Tri-Brigade, right? Earth Machine. The Earth Machine indie top, it was close. It was very funny. Punk Gold Pride. I'm so sorry, friends. Maybe when the goblins come out. Where Makonko? It top 32. Where is Makonko? At the bottom of top 32. Where it belongs. Joseph, what about Pendulum? Actually, a great question. I think that Pendulum has a really pronounced capacity to be insanely strong in this format. I think that the Zark Pendulum list has a unique ability to play the non-engine that is coming to define not only this format, but how we play Yu-Gi-Oh! I think there is a real chance that it is a contender in upcoming formats, and I think that the reason it's not currently represented is it plays differently than Pendulum Slop usually does. It's going to take people a little bit to adjust. Not sponsored. I really think that deck is good. Live Twin. Could be playable as part of Sprite. Goatee. We need the new stuff, baby. Then it's going to be tier 0. Runic Furhire. It's on here. Branded Despia. It's also on here. SP Little Knight Control. Well, there it is. It's actually the very first one on here, right? SP Little Knight Control right here. Unchained. Also